The cold Malibu rain felt like a betrayal mirroring the one that had just shattered Aurora Harrington's world. One moment she was the 6 months pregnant wife of tech mogul Lucian Harrington, living a fairy tale in their $40 million cliffside estate. The next she was standing outside its towering iron gates, a single suitcase by her side, watching the taillights of her husband's Porsche disappear down the winding coastal highway. He had left her penniless and abandoned for a younger model. But what Lucian, the press, and the entire world didn't know was that the real power lay not in his billions, but in a secret hidden within the very foundation of the paradise he had just kicked her out of, a secret about to be exposed in the most public way imaginable. The Azure Point estate wasn't just a house, it was a statement. Perched on a dramatic bluff overlooking the Pacific, the sprawling contemporary villa was a symphony of glass steel and bleached oak, a fortress of wealth so immense it seemed to bend the very light around it. To the outside world, Aurora and Lucian Harrington were the king and queen of this kingdom. He was the brilliant, ruthless founder of a data analytics firm, Viridia, a man whose face graced the covers of business magazines. She was his elegant architect-trained wife, the quiet grace behind his bombastic success, her touch evident in every perfectly curated corner of their home. But for the last year, the gilded cage had begun to feel less like a home, and more like a beautiful, empty museum. Lucian had become distant, his nights growing longer, his explanations for his absences becoming thinner, more laced with irritation. The warmth that had once defined their relationship had cooled into a polite, sterile courtesy. Aurora, now carrying the distinct swell of their first child, told herself it was the pressure of a new product launch, the stress of being a titan of industry. She tried harder, ensuring his favorite single malt was waiting when he returned, managing the staff with a quiet efficiency that made their life frictionless perfect. The end came not with a slow burn, but with a sudden, violent explosion. It was a Tuesday evening. A storm was rolling in off the ocean, the sky a bruised purple. Aurora was in the nursery. She had designed a serene space of soft whites and natural wood, running her hand over the smooth rail of the crib. She felt the baby kick a small flutter of reassurance and smiled. That's when she heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway, much earlier than she expected. But it wasn't just Lucian's car. A second, a low-slung cherry-red convertible followed his into the courtyard. Aurora's heart gave a strange, nervous lurch. She walked to the grand floor-to-ceiling window in the living room that offered a panoramic view of the entrance. Lucian emerged from his car, but he wasn't alone. A woman unfolded herself from the passenger seat of the convertible, a tall, impossibly slender blonde, with legs that seemed to start at her jawline. Aurora recognized her instantly from the tabloid's Katerina Volkova, a model and influencer known more for her high-profile relationships than her runway work. Katerina laughed, a sound that carried on the wind, sharp and brittle. She looped her arm through Lucian's, and they walked towards the front door, as if they owned the world, as if Aurora didn't exist. A cold dread heavier than any storm cloud settled over her. She stood frozen in the center of the vast living room as the massive oak door swung open. "Aurora," Lucian said, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion. He didn't even have the decency to look guilty. "Katerina will be staying here now." Katerina's eyes, a pale, predatory blue, scanned the room, then landed on Aurora, lingering on her swollen stomach with a faint, dismissive smirk. "Nice place," she purred, her accent a carefully cultivated blend of Eastern European and Californian vocal fry. "A little Domestic for my taste, but I can work with it. The world tilted on its axis. Aurora's breath hitched. Lucian! What is this? Who is she? She's my future, Lucian said, shrugging out of his expensive jacket and tossing it onto a minimalist chair worth more than a car. We're past pretending, Aurora. This marriage, this life, it's over. My lawyer, Leland Crane, will be in touch tomorrow with the paperwork. Paperwork? Aurora whispered, her voice trembling. She clutched her belly, a protective instinct taking over. Lucian, I'm pregnant. We're having a baby. He finally looked at her then, and his eyes were chips of ice. Your baby, he corrected her. Let's be honest. This pregnancy was your last-ditch effort to keep me, and it didn't work. I'll provide for the child, of course. A trust will be set up. But you and I are finished. Tears welled hot and useless. You can't do this. This is my home. Katerina laughed again, that grating, high-pitched sound. Actually, it's his home. Bought and paid for by Viridia's success. You were just the interior decorator. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Every detail, every choice Aurora had made to turn this structure into a sanctuary was being twisted into an insult. Get your things, Lucian commanded, his voice hardening into the one he used to fire underperforming executives. Just the essentials. The rest will be sent to wherever you decide to go. You have 20 minutes. Go. Go where? The panic was a physical thing now clawing at her throat. Her family was gone, her parents having passed years ago. Her life, her friends, her entire support system were all tied to Lucian. That's not my problem anymore, he said, turning his back on her to pour himself and Katerina a drink from the crystal decanter on the bar. Numbly guided by some autopilot function of her shocked mind, Aurora walked up the floating glass staircase to their bedroom suite. On the bed, a suitcase was already open. The staff, their faces averted and full of pity, must have been instructed beforehand. Her loyal butler of 5 years, Mr. Davies, stood stoically by the door. Ma'am, he murmured, his voice thick with an emotion he was professionally bound to suppress. I am so very sorry. She packed haphazardly, her hands shaking so badly she could barely zip the bag. Clothes, toiletries, the framed ultrasound picture from her nightstand. 20 minutes later she was being escorted to the front door by a private security guard Lucian must have hired for the occasion. The rain had started a relentless, driving downpour. As she stepped outside, the massive door clicked shut behind her. She stood there, a pregnant woman, in the rain, with a single suitcase, staring at the warm, glowing lights of the home that was no longer hers. The iron gates which she had helped design began to slide shut with a low, mournful hum, sealing her out of her own life. Lucian didn't even have the courage to watch her leave. Through the window she could see his silhouette and Katerina's laughing as they clinked their glasses together. The fairy tale had ended, and the monster wasn't a dragon or a witch. He was the prince she had married. The first hour was a blur of shock and cold. Aurora stood in the rain, her designer coat soaked through the water dripping from her hair onto the leather of her suitcase. Cars, their headlights cutting through the deluge, sped past on the Pacific Coast Highway, their occupants oblivious to the woman whose life had just been violently dismantled on the side of the road. Her phone. She had to call someone. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers numb and clumsy. Her first instinct was to call her best friend, Sophia Klein, a sharp-witted art gallery owner in downtown LA. The call went to voicemail. Aurora left a garbled, tear-choked message, the the words barely coherent. She needed a hotel, a safe place to think. She tried to open her ride-sharing app, but a notification popped up. Payment method declined. Confused, she opened her banking app. The screen that usually greeted her, with a healthy balance from their joint checking account, now showed a stark, brutal zero. She tried to access her personal savings account, one she'd maintained since before she met Lucian. Access denied. A cold dread seeped into her bones, far colder than the rain. He hadn't just thrown her out. He had financially obliterated her. Every account, every credit card she had, was linked to their marital estate, an estate he had just seized with chilling precision. He had planned this. Every detail was calculated to leave her utterly powerless. A wave of dizziness washed over her, and she leaned against the cold stone of the estate's outer wall for support. The baby kicked a frantic, insistent rhythm, as if sensing its mother's distress. "It's okay, little one," she whispered, her hand protectively over her womb. "We're okay." But it was a lie, and they both knew it. Finally, her phone rang. It was Sophia. "Aurora! Oh my God, I just got your message. I was in a showing. You sound awful. Where are you?" I'm outside the house," Aurora sobbed. "Sophia, he threw me out. He has another woman. He kicked me out and locked all the accounts." There was a string of curses on the other end of the line. "Stay right there. Don't move. I'm leaving now. I'll be there in 45 minutes. Traffic be damned. Just stay on the phone with me." The wait was agonizing. Each passing minute felt like an hour. Sophia stayed on the line, her voice a lifeline of calm fury in the chaotic storm of Aurora's emotions. When Sophia's car, a practical SUV that was the antithesis of Katerina's flashy convertible, pulled over, she leaped out with an umbrella. She took one look at Aurora's pale, rain-streaked face and enveloped her in a fierce hug. "We'll handle this," Sophia said, her voice firm. "We'll destroy him." Sophia's apartment in Santa Monica was small but warm and inviting. It felt like a different universe from the cold, cavernous rooms of Azure Point. After a hot shower and a change into some of Sophia's clothes, which were a bit tight over her bump, Aurora sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, nursing a cup of chamomile tea. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by a profound, soul-crushing exhaustion. The next morning, the reality of her situation came into sharper focus. Lucian's lawyer, Leland Crane, sent an email. It was brutally concise. It outlined a divorce settlement offer that was not just an insult, but a declaration of war. He was offering her a one-time payment of $50,000 in consideration of their brief marriage, and the standard child support mandated by the state of California once the baby was born. All other assets, including the Azure Point estate, were declared the sole and separate property of Mr. Harrington, acquired through his singular business efforts. The email ended with a veiled threat. "Mr. Harrington hopes for a swift and discreet resolution. Should Ms. Hensley choose to contest this generous offer, we are prepared to litigate aggressively and explore all facets of her conduct during the marriage." "Conduct," Aurora said aloud, her voice hoarse with disbelief. "What conduct? I dedicated the last 5 years of my life to him, to building our home. He's trying to intimidate you," Sophia said, reading the email over her shoulder, her face tight with anger. "He thinks because he has the money and the power, you'll just roll over and accept the scraps he's throwing you. We need a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, a shark." Sophia was well connected in the city's professional circles. She made a few calls, and by noon they had an appointment for the following day with one of the most respected and feared family law attorneys in Los Angeles, Madeline Cho. That night, sleep offered no escape. Aurora was haunted by nightmares of closing gates and Lucian's cold, dismissive face. She woke up in a cold sweat, her heart pounding. She was alone, pregnant, and facing a legal battle against a billionaire who held all the cards. He had taken her home, her security, her dignity. He had stripped her of everything she thought was hers. He believed he had left her with nothing. But as she lay in the unfamiliar darkness of Sophia's guest room, a forgotten memory began to surface, a whisper from the past, a memory of her grandmother, a woman of quiet strength and hidden iron, and a dusty, leather-bound folder tucked away in a storage unit she hadn't opened in years. Aurora's grandmother, Beatrice Hensley, had been a formidable woman. She was not a woman of flamboyant wealth, but of old, quiet money, managed with shrewd intelligence and a healthy skepticism of charismatic men. A Parisian immigrant who had built a small but successful art import business, Beatrice had carried herself with an unshakable poise. Her favorite adage, which she'd repeated to Aurora countless times, echoed in her mind now. "Ma chérie, a man is not a financial plan. A woman must always have a door that only she holds the key to." Before she passed away 3 years ago, Beatrice had sat Aurora down. She had presented her with a thick, leather-bound portfolio. "This is for you," she had said, her eyes serious. "It is your safety, your independence. The funds are managed by my old friend and trustee, Miss Abernathy. They are to be used for something permanent, something that can't be gambled away or lost in a bad business deal. Something that is yours and yours alone." At the time, Aurora was deeply in love with Lucian. His star was rising, and their life felt secure. She had thanked her grandmother, touched by the gesture, but had seen it as a quaint relic of a bygone era. She had put the portfolio in a secure storage unit, along with other family heirlooms, and had largely forgotten the specifics, knowing only that a trust existed in her name. Now Beatrice's words felt less like quaint advice and more like a prophecy. "Sophia, I need to go to my storage unit in Pasadena," Aurora said the next morning, a new fragile sense of purpose in her voice. An hour later, they were standing in the cool, sterile corridor of the storage facility. Aurora punched in the code, and the metal door rolled up with a loud rumble. The air inside was still and smelled of dust and old paper. Pushed to the back behind her old college textbooks and her mother's antique furniture was a small fireproof safe. Inside was the leather portfolio. Her hands trembled as she carried it to a nearby table. She opened it, and the scent of aged leather and paper filled the air. Inside, neatly organized by tabs, were trust documents, bank statements, and investment reports from the Beatrice Hensley Legacy Trust. Aurora's eyes scanned the figures, and her breath caught in her throat. The value of the trust was far, far greater than she had ever imagined. Beatrice had been more than just shrewd. She had been a brilliant investor. But it was the tab labeled Azure Point Acquisition that made her heart stop. She and Lucian had found the property together. It had been a spectacular but unfinished shell abandoned by a previous developer. Lucian had been ecstatic, but at the time his assets were tied up in Viridia stock. A massive cash purchase was difficult. Aurora, wanting to contribute, had remembered her grandmother's trust. She remembered the phone call to the trustee, Mr. Abernathy, a kind elderly man who had known her since she was a child. "Your grandmother was very specific, Aurora," he had explained. "The funds can be used for a primary residence, but the title must be held solely by you or directly by the trust to protect it as a legacy asset. It cannot be commingled or used as collateral for your husband's business ventures. It had all seemed like legal formalities at the time. Lucian had been impatient with the process. Lawyers and their red tape, he'd scoffed. Just get it done, Aurora. We want the house. He signed whatever papers the trust's lawyers put in front of him, acknowledging the source of the funds and the ownership structure, likely without reading them, eager to get his hands on the property. The purchase was structured in a way that was legally ironclad. The entire $28 million purchase price for the land and the unfinished structure was wired directly from the Beatrice Hensley Legacy Trust to the seller. The deed of title recorded with the County of Los Angeles was in the name of Aurora Hensley, her maiden name. Lucian had then poured millions of his own money into finishing the construction, the extravagant infinity pool, the state-of-the-art technology. He saw that as his investment, his stamp of ownership. He likely assumed that his financial contributions and their marriage automatically made the property a shared marital asset with him as the primary owner. He had either forgotten the details of the initial purchase, or in his arrogance believed they didn't matter. He was wrong. Tucked into a sleeve at the back of the portfolio was a letter in her grandmother's elegant looping script. My dearest Aurora, if you are reading this, I hope it is with a happy heart, standing in a home that brings you joy. But I am a practical woman, and I know life is not always a fairy tale. I have created this for you, not out of a lack of faith in your choices, but out of a deep and abiding love for you. This is your foundation. No storm, no man, no misfortune can ever take it from you. Remember your worth. You are a Hensley. We bend, but we do not break. Always have the key to your own door. Avec tout mon amour. Grand-mère Béatrice. Tears streamed down Aurora's face, but these were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of gratitude, of love, of a strength she thought she had lost, but was now finding again. Lucian had kicked her out of his house, but he had made a colossal mistake. He hadn't kicked her out of his house. He had kicked her out of her house. Clutching the portfolio to her chest, she looked at Sophia, a fierce, determined light in her eyes. "Let's go see that lawyer," she said. "I think we have a case." The law offices of Cho and Associates were located in a sleek high-rise in Century City, a world of polished marble, hushed tones, and palpable power. Madeline Cho was a petite woman in her late 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a demeanor that radiated a calm, lethal competence. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Ms. Hensley," she began, after gesturing for Aurora and Sophia to sit. Sophia gave me the broad strokes. "Your husband is Lucian Harrington. He has you at a significant disadvantage. He has the resources, the public profile, and one of the most ruthless legal teams in the state, led by Leland Crane. Tell me what you have that gives you even a sliver of hope." Without a word, Aurora slid the leather portfolio across the vast mahogany desk. Madeline Cho opened it. For the next 20 minutes, the only sound in the room was the soft rustle of paper as she meticulously reviewed every document. She read the trust charter, the wire transfer confirmations for the $28 million purchase, the preliminary title report, and finally the certified copy of the grant deed. Her expression remained impassive, but a subtle shift occurred in her posture. She leaned forward, a glint of steel entering her eyes. She looked up, her gaze fixed on Aurora. "He put his improvements, his millions, into a property titled solely in your maiden name, purchased with funds from a multi-generational protected trust." "Yes," Aurora said, her voice quiet but firm. "He was in a hurry. I don't think he cared about the details. He just wanted the house. A slow smile spread across Madeline's face. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator that has just spotted a fatal weakness in its prey. "Miss Hensley," she said, her voice now charged with energy. "This isn't a sliver of hope. This is a cannon. Leland Crane and Mr. Harrington are playing checkers, and they don't realize we're about to overturn the entire chessboard." The strategy was simple and devastating. They would not respond to Lucian's paltry divorce settlement. They would ignore it completely. Instead, Madeline would file 2 separate explosive motions. First, an emergency petition for sole and exclusive use of the marital residence on the grounds that Aurora was the legal owner. Second, a formal complaint of wrongful eviction. "We won't just ask for the house back, we'll demand it," Madeline explained. "And we will file for a temporary restraining order against both Lucian and his guest, Katerina Volkova, barring them from entering the property. He threw a pregnant woman out of her own home. No judge in this state will look kindly upon that." The following days were a whirlwind of legal activity. The petitions were filed. Lucian Harrington and Leland Crane were served. The reaction was immediate and arrogant. Leland Crane called Madeline personally. His voice, which Aurora imagined was usually smooth and condescending, was tinged with incredulous anger. "This is a desperate, pathetic stunt, Madeline," he barked over the speakerphone in Cho's office. "The property is a marital asset. My client poured over $12 million into it. He transformed it from a shell into a masterpiece. His contributions grant him a majority stake. This will be thrown out of court." Madeline's reply was chillingly calm. "Leland, your client, made a gift, a very, very generous $12 million gift to his wife's separate property. The law on this is quite clear. Transmutation of property requires a written declaration. Did your client ever get Ms. Hensley to sign a document granting him title or ownership? No a pity. We have the deed. We have the proof of funds. What you have is an arrogant client who didn't read the fine print." She continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "And let me give you some friendly advice. Tell your client to pack his bags, and tell his girlfriend to pack hers, because a process server is on his way to the Azure Point estate right now with a court order. They have 48 hours to vacate." The silence on the other end of the line was profound. For the first time, the Harrington legal team was speechless. The news hit the gossip columns like a thunderclap. Tech mogul Lucian Harrington in bitter divorce. Wife claims ownership of 40 Bunlandthal's Malibu mansion. The narrative began to shift. Aurora was no longer just the jilted, pathetic wife. She was a player, a mystery. Lucian predictably was enraged. He saw it as the ultimate betrayal, not his affair, but her audacity in fighting back. He doubled down. His PR team began leaking stories to friendly tabloids, painting Aurora as a gold digger who had tricked him, a cold, calculating woman who had planned this all along. They highlighted his $12 million investment, framing it as him being the victim of a sophisticated fraud. But Madeline had anticipated this. "Let him scream," she told Aurora. "He's making our case for us. He's admitting in public that he spent millions on a property he didn't legally own. Every article he plants is another nail in his own coffin." The court date for the emergency hearing was set. It was in 1 week. Aurora felt a terrifying mix of fear and exhilaration. For the first time since the gates had slammed shut, she wasn't a victim cowering in the rain. She was a woman walking back into the storm, ready to claim what was hers. The board was set. The pieces were in motion, and the king, for all his power and bluster, was about to find himself in check. The courtroom in the Stanley Mosque Courthouse in downtown Los Angeles was an imposing chamber of dark wood and stern tradition. It was packed. The story had caught fire, a high-stakes drama of love betrayal and unimaginable wealth. Reporters from every major news outlet and gossip blog filled the gallery, their pens poised. Lucian Harrington arrived flanked by a team of lawyers led by Leland Crane. He looked immaculate in a custom-tailored suit, his expression a mask of confident indignation crafted for the cameras. He was playing the part of the wronged tycoon. Katerina Volkova was notably absent, a strategic move, no doubt, to avoid looking like a home wrecker in front of the judge. Aurora entered from the other side with Madeleine Cho. She wore a simple but elegant navy maternity dress, her hand resting almost unconsciously on her stomach. She did not look at Lucian. Her focus was entirely on Madeleine and the path ahead. She projected not weakness, but a quiet, unbreakable resolve. The Honorable Judge Eleanor Vance, a woman known for her sharp intellect and no-nonsense approach, presided. She looked down from her bench, her gaze sweeping over the two legal teams. Mr. Crane, Ms. Cho, I have read the preliminary filings. This is a hearing on Ms. Hensley's request for a temporary restraining order and exclusive use of the residence at 247 Azure Point Road. Mr. Crane, your client is currently occupying the residence. Please enlighten me as to why he believes he has the right to remain. Leland Crane rose his voice, smooth and practiced. Your Honor, it's quite simple. The Azure Point estate is a marital asset. While the initial purchase may have utilized funds from a trust belonging to my client's wife, Mr. Harrington, subsequently entrusted over $12 million of his own separate funds into the property's completion. This significant financial contribution, this sweat equity on a colossal scale, transformed the property and established his primary ownership interest. We have receipts, bank records, contracts for every dollar spent. He is the majority stakeholder in this asset. He gestured towards Aurora. This action by Ms. Hensley is a transparent and opportunistic attempt to seize a valuable asset created primarily by my client's hard work and financial genius. She was the homemaker. He was the provider. The law recognizes that imbalance. Judge Vance listened patiently, her fingers steepled. Thank you, Mr. Crane. Ms. Cho, your response. Madeleine Cho stood. She was calm, methodical. Your Honor, Mr. Crane speaks of financial contributions. We do not dispute them. In fact, we welcome them. Mr. Harrington made a very lavish gift to his wife. However, in the state of California, a gift is a gift. The concept of sweat equity does not magically alter a property's legal title. She placed a single certified document on the prosecutor's table. This, Your Honor, is the grant deed for 247 Azure Point Road, recorded on May 14th, 2022. I would ask you to note the name in the section marked Grantee. A clerk handed the document to the judge. Judge Vance put on her reading glasses and studied it. The courtroom was silent. The grantee is listed as Aurora Hensley, a single woman. The judge read aloud, her voice neutral. The use of single woman was a legal term for the title vesting as it was purchased before her name had officially changed post-marriage. A detail Madeleine knew was a powerful psychological anchor. And now, Your Honor, Madeleine continued, this is a certified copy of the wire transfer confirmation from the Beatrice Hensley Legacy Trust to the seller for the full purchase price of $28 million. She produced a second document. And finally, she said, her voice ringing with clarity, This is a spousal consent form signed by Mr. Lucian Harrington himself, explicitly acknowledging that the funds for the purchase originated from Ms. Hensley's separate trust and that he claims no ownership interest in the initial acquisition. It was a requirement from the trustees. She let the weight of that statement hang in the air. Mr. Crane is correct that his client spent $12 million, but he spent it on a house he knew, or should have known, was not his. He built his castle on land that belonged to his queen, and then he threw her out of it. A gasp rippled through the gallery. Lucian's face, for the first time, lost its confident smirk. The color drained from it, replaced by a pallor of disbelief. He shot a furious, panicked look at Leland Crane, whose own face had tightened into a grim mask. They had been completely outmaneuvered. They had prepared for a fight over marital assets, not an ambush with incontrovertible proof of sole ownership. Judge Vance looked from the documents to Lucian Harrington. Her expression was now anything but neutral. It was glacial. "Mr. Harrington," the judge said, her voice dangerously soft. "Is this your signature on this consent form?" Lucian's Adam's apple bobbed. I sign a lot of documents, Your Honor. My legal team handles these things. It is a simple question, Mr. Harrington. Yes or no?" "Yes," he muttered, the word barely audible. "And did you or did you not remove your 6 months pregnant wife from this residence and change the locks? The situation is complex," Crane interjected, trying to regain control. "It seems remarkably simple to me, Counselor," Judge Vance snapped back. "I have a deed in Ms. Hensley's name. I have proof of purchase from her trust. I have a signed waiver from your client. And I have a pregnant woman who has been rendered homeless." She looked directly at Lucian, her eyes filled with unconcealed contempt. "Mr. Harrington, you are a guest in Ms. Hensley's home, and your welcome has been rescinded." The gavel came down with a crack that echoed like a gunshot. "The temporary restraining order is granted. Mr. Harrington, you and any of your associates will vacate the premises at 247 Azure Point Road within 24 hours. You are to remain 100 yards away from the property and from Ms. Hensley at all times. We will address the matter of your $12 million gift in the forthcoming divorce proceedings. For now, the house belongs to its owner. This hearing is adjourned." The room erupted. Cameras flashed. Reporters scrambled. Lucian Harrington sat stunned. His billion-dollar emperor suddenly unable to protect him from the simple, devastating power of his own signature. Aurora didn't look at him. She took a deep, steadying breath, placed a hand on her belly, and allowed Madeline to guide her out of the courtroom. She had won the battle. But she knew the war was far from over. Losing in court, so publicly and so humiliatingly, did not humble Lucian Harrington. It uncaged him. A man accustomed to winning at all costs, to bending the world to his will, could not comprehend being so thoroughly defeated. His rage, stripped of its legal avenues, soured into something darker and more desperate. He was a cornered animal, and cornered animals are dangerously unpredictable. The first attack was through the media. The narrative his PR team had been pushing now went into overdrive. Overnight, Aurora was painted as the ultimate villain. She became the Black Widow of Malibu, a cunning schemer who had used a pregnancy to trap a wealthy man, meticulously planning for years to steal his dream home. Anonymous sources close to Lucian were quoted in every sleazy publication claiming she was emotionally unstable, that Lucian had endured years of her erratic behavior and had only stayed for the sake of their unborn child. They even twisted the truth of her grandmother's trust, framing it as a hoard of hidden family money she had deceptively concealed from him. The stories were vicious and deeply personal, designed to chip away at her composure and public sympathy. Sophia did her best to shield Aurora from the worst of it, but the headlines were inescapable. For a few days, the weight of the public slander was crushing. Doubt, like a venomous weed, tried to take root in her mind. Was she being greedy? Was this fight worth the toll it was taking on her and her baby? It was a call from Mr. Davies, the butler, she thought she'd never hear from again, that solidified her resolve. "Mrs. Harrington. I mean, Miss Hensley," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I'm calling from my personal phone. I was let go, of course, along with the rest of the staff who were loyal to you. But I needed to warn you. Mr. Davies, it's so good to hear your voice. Are you all right?" "I am, ma'am. But you need to be careful. Mr. Harrington is unraveling. The night you left, I overheard him on the phone with Mr. Crane. He was shouting. He said if he couldn't have the house, he'd make sure no one could. He talked about using his investment as leverage, about finding a way to place a lien on the property to drown you in so much litigation the house would have to be sold to cover the legal fees." A cold chill went down Aurora's spine. "And there's more, ma'am," Mr. Davies continued, his voice dropping further. "That woman, Katerina, she's not just a pretty face. She was going through your old office, your personal drawers. I believe they are looking for something, anything they can use against you. Please be careful." The warning proved prescient. A week later, Madeline Cho received a new filing from Leland Crane's office. It was a bold, outrageous legal maneuver. They were suing Aurora for the return of the $12 million plus interest and damages. They claimed that the money was not a gift, but a business investment, made under the verbal agreement that ownership would be shared. They were demanding the court force the sale of Azure Point to satisfy the debt. Simultaneously, Lucien launched a more insidious attack. He began systematically contacting the high-end contractors and designers who had worked on the estate's completion. Leveraging his immense business influence, he pressured them to retroactively file mechanics liens against the property, claiming they had not been fully paid for their services paid for by Lucien's funds. It was a complex and dirty tactic designed to cloud the title, making it impossible for Aurora to sell or refinance the property, effectively trapping her in a house she couldn't afford to maintain. The pressure was immense. The monthly carrying costs of Azure Point property taxes, insurance, utilities, basic maintenance were astronomical. Without access to liquid funds, even owning a $40 million asset was a liability. Lucien knew this. He wasn't just trying to get the house back. He was trying to bankrupt her, to force her into a desperate position where she would have to accept his original insulting offer. During a tense strategy session, Madeline Cho laid out the grim reality. "He's bleeding us. He can afford to drag this out for years. We need to cut off his ammunition." "How do we do that?" Aurora asked, the stress visibly taking its toll. "We prove his malice," Madeline said, her eyes narrowing. "We prove that his investment was never a business deal, but a personal project for the marital home. We prove that his current actions are not about recouping a debt, but about harassment and intimidation. And to do that, we need witnesses who heard him talk about the house before all this blew up. People who know his true intentions." Aurora's mind immediately went to one person. "Mr. Davies," she said, but Lucien was one step ahead. When Madeline's investigator tried to contact Mr. Davies to subpoena him as a witness, they learned he had been offered a lucrative new position managing a private hotel in the Cayman Islands, a hotel owned by a holding company that was a subsidiary of Viridia. He had been effectively bought and removed from the board. The move was a gut punch. It was a clear message from Lucian. Everyone was for sale. Everyone had a price. He was turning his vast wealth into a weapon aimed directly at her heart. That evening, as Aurora sat alone in Sophia's apartment, the city lights twinkling below, she felt a wave of despair. Lucian wasn't just fighting her. He was trying to erase her, to prove that she was nothing without him. He was trying to take her past, her present, and her future. Her hand went to her belly, where a strong, steady kick answered her touch. It was a reminder. She was not just fighting for a house. She was fighting for her child's future, for the legacy her grandmother had entrusted to her, and for the right to exist on her own terms. The fear didn't vanish, but it was joined by a harder, colder emotion: fury. She picked up the phone and called Madeline. "He thinks he's bought everyone," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "But he hasn't. My grandmother's trustee, Mr. Abernathy. He was on all the original calls. He dealt with Lucian's lawyers. He knows everything. Get him on the stand." Lucian Harrington had forgotten about the old man who managed the money. And that was going to be his final fatal mistake. The final hearing was not about ownership that had already been established. This was about Lucian's $12 million counterclaim. It was his last desperate attempt to either reclaim his money or, failing that, to encumber the Azure Point estate so heavily that Aurora could never truly possess it. His entire case rested on a single, flimsy premise that his massive expenditure was a business investment based on a verbal agreement. Leland Crane presented their case first. He called to the stand a parade of witnesses, contractors, architects, and financial advisors, all of whom testified that Lucian was deeply involved and that they considered him the client. They presented mountains of invoices paid from Lucian's personal accounts. Crane's argument was slick and compelling. No man would spend $12 million on a home for his wife without an expectation of shared ownership. It defied common sense. Then it was Madeline Cho's turn. Her first and only witness was a man who looked utterly out of place in the high-powered courtroom, Mr. Alistair Abernathy, the trustee of the Beatrice Hensley Legacy Trust. He was in his late 70s, with a shock of white hair, a tweed jacket, and an air of gentle, unshakable integrity. Madeline led him through the initial stages of the Azure Point acquisition. "Mr. Abernathy, can you describe your interactions with Mr. Harrington during the purchase process?" Mr. Abernathy adjusted his spectacles. "Certainly. Mr. Harrington was very enthusiastic and very impatient. I had several conversations with him and his legal team. I was required by the explicit terms of Mrs. Hensley's will to ensure the asset remained solely under the protection of the trust or in Aurora's name. I explained this to Mr. Harrington on no fewer than 3 occasions." "And what was his response?" Madeline asked. "He was dismissive of the legalities." Mr. Abernathy recalled his voice, clear and precise. "I remember his exact words on one call. He said, 'I don't care about the trust's ancient paperwork, old man. I'm going to build my wife the greatest home in California. Just get the money to the seller so I can get started.' He saw our legal protections as a mere bureaucratic hurdle to his grand vision." Leland Crane on the opposing side began to look uneasy. Madeline pressed on. "So he was made explicitly aware that the property would not be his legally, unquestionably," Mr. Abernathy stated. "He even signed a document to that effect, which I believe the court has already seen. Any funds he contributed after the purchase were done with full knowledge of this fact. In the eyes of the trust and the law, such contributions could only be interpreted as a gift." Leland Crane attempted to discredit him on cross-examination. "Mr. Abernathy, isn't it true you have a long-standing loyalty to the Hensley family, that your testimony might be biased?" Mr. Abernathy met his gaze without flinching. "My loyalty is to the truth and to the legal duties I am bound to uphold as a fiduciary. My records, my correspondence, and my memory are all perfectly clear on this matter, sir." He was an immovable object of quiet dignity, and Crane's aggressive questioning only made him look like a bully. But Madeline had one final devastating piece of evidence. She introduced into evidence a recorded deposition from Mr. Davies, taken via video link from the Cayman Islands. A legal loophole had allowed them to compel his testimony, despite Lucian's attempts to hide him away. On the large screen in the courtroom, Mr. Davies's kind, worried face appeared. He recounted under oath the night Aurora was thrown out, but he also recounted something else. About a month before that night, Mr. Davies said, his voice steady, "Mr. Harrington was hosting a dinner party for some investors. He was showing off the new terrace and the view. I was serving drinks when I heard one of the guests ask him, 'Lucian, what happens if Aurora ever leaves you? Does she get half of this palace?' A hush fell over the courtroom. "And what did Mr. Harrington say?" Madeline asked softly, and Davies took a deep breath. He laughed. He clapped the man on the shoulder and said, "Don't worry about that. Her name may be on the deed, but my money is in the walls. I've got her right where I want her. She's never leaving." He said it like a joke, but his eyes were cold. He saw it as a form of control. The video ended. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. In one fell swoop, Mr. Abernathy's testimony and Mr. Davies's recollection had shattered Lucian's entire case. They had proven there was no business agreement. They had proven he knew the ownership structure from the beginning. And most damningly, they had revealed his motive. It was never about investment. It was about power and control over his wife. He hadn't been building a home with her. He had been building her cage. Judge Vance looked at Lucian Harrington, and if looks could incinerate, he would have been a pile of ash. "Mr. Harrington, your counterclaim is not only denied, it is dismissed with prejudice. It is a frivolous, vindictive, and frankly pathetic attempt to harass a woman you have already wronged in the most egregious manner." She wasn't finished. "Your actions as illuminated by the testimony we've heard today are reprehensible. You knowingly poured money into an asset that was not yours, not as an investment, but as a means of control. This court finds your entire claim to be made in bad faith. Therefore, I am ordering you to pay for all of Ms. Hensley's legal fees. All of them." It was the final humiliating blow. Not only had he lost his $12 million, but now he had to pay for the brilliant legal strategy that had defeated him. Aurora felt a single tear trace a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of release. The weight that had been pressing on her for months had finally lifted. She had faced the monster not with his weapons of wealth and intimidation, but with truth and the quiet legacy of a grandmother's love. As she walked out of the courthouse, blinking in the bright California sun, she didn't look back. Lucian Harrington was part of her past. In front of her was Azure Point, her home. And inside her, her baby kicked gently, as if to say, "We're ready to go home." In the end, Aurora's story became more than just a salacious headline. It became a testament to quiet strength and hidden resilience. She moved back into Azure Point, not as a wife or a victim, but as its sole and rightful owner. A few months later, she gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, whom she named Beatrice. The house, once a symbol of a toxic marriage, was transformed. The cold, minimalist spaces were filled with the warmth of a baby's laughter and the strength of a woman who had reclaimed her life. Lucien Harrington's downfall was swift. The court case exposed his hubris, and the testimony about his controlling nature caused a scandal that his board of directors at Viridia couldn't ignore. He was forced to step down as CEO, his reputation in tatters. Katerina Volkova, seeing his power and fortune diminish, disappeared from his life as quickly as she had entered it. Aurora's victory reminds us that the most formidable power isn't always the loudest or the most obvious. Sometimes it's hidden in the fine print, in the wisdom passed down through generations, and in the unyielding courage of a person fighting for more than just money or property, but for their very identity. Thank you for listening to this incredible story. If you were moved by Aurora's journey from betrayal to triumph, please show your support by hitting that like button and sharing this video with someone who needs to hear a story of resilience. Don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell so you won't miss our next story. And tell us in the comments, what do you think was Lucien's biggest mistake? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, remember that even when the world seems darkest, your own strength might be the key that unlocks everything.